From the millionaire's tax to the fight over prison closures to the on-again, off-again, on-again linking of rent control and a property tax cap, and of course those old faithfuls, education and healthcare. Budget negotiations up to this point have been quite a roller coaster ride. And joining me now to help figure out how we got here and where we actually might be going, if we're going anywhere at all, are the reporters of the Roundtable, veterans of the Albany Press Corps who have been chasing our state leaders through the halls of the Capitol all of this week and today. Casey Seiler is the state editor for the Albany Times-Union, and then across the table we have Ken Lovett. He is the Albany bureau chief for the New York Daily News, and Michael Amon. He writes for Newsday. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I really like to see you. And it was a bizarro day. So
we kept waiting. The legislative leaders yesterday said that a good chance we'll have a budget deal or a conceptual deal or a framework of a conceptual deal today. This morning, Dean Skelos said, I think we're still on track, and now the leaders are gone, and no one's in Albany right now, and there's no budget in place.
Yeah. I mean, what is it? The interesting thing was that it seemed like the governor was the one who was like, no, conceptual deal is not good enough, guys.
The governor is sticking with, we always complain about the governor kind of staying on message and not getting off message, but he has been rock solid on message for this entire week, from the video saying now is the time for the legislature to act, to today saying unequivocally we don't have a deal, we don't have a deal. He keeps trotting out this line, which is a wonderful line of the legislature. Legislative leaders are great at getting from the 50-yard line to the 1-yard line and not getting anything done. It is completely appropriate in so many cases, and he's not going to let it happen this time.
Michael, this is your first budget, right?
That's correct.
So what do you make of all of this?
Boy, it is an experience. Because people who are more experienced than me have been predicting that a lot of the optimistic talk coming from the leaders may just be talk. And I wasn't sure because you sometimes assume people are telling you the truth, but you learn not to do that anymore.
Not in this town.
Yeah. But it does seem like the most optimistic talk is coming out of the Senate. I think Dean Skelos has been saying he's very optimistic they're going to have a budget in place. I think he said by today, or an agreement in place by today. And I think some of it maybe he's setting up, expectations that the Senate is the one that wants to work and wants to get this done, and he's putting it on the Assembly to pull them along.
Even though the Senate has just as many sticking points as the Assembly at this point.
Absolutely. The Senate has issues on prisons, and it had it on some of the health care stuff. But I think ultimately something will get done by the deadline.
Or before, or by?
Or before. I think we're days away. This is not uncommon for this kind of thing to happen. It's not uncommon for them to say they're close and then they haggle for a few more days. And it wouldn't be uncommon for there to be a last-minute blow-up and then they put it back together. These are things we've all seen. There's one major difference this time, though.
Andrew?
But not only you have a governor who's committed to his program, but you have a governor who has a hammer at the end.
Yeah.
So he doesn't care. He's like, if we get it on time, great. If not, I'm going to ram all my cuts through on the extenders, and you can either pass them or close down the government.
Let me just ask you this then. Why is it that the Senate and the Assembly don't pass a two-way deal, at least so they can take it away from him and say, well, we did pass a budget?
But they don't take it away.
Then they have to take the pain that is going to come with, with having to trim $9 billion out of that.
No, that's not even it. I'll tell you why. Go back last year. They did that last year to David Patterson, because if you remember, for all the talk of David Patterson wielding this hammer, he negotiated every extender except one. And when he got down to it and he said, all right, I'm putting education in, I'm putting some of the other stuff I want in, they got together and did a two-way budget, and he vetoed every single addition.
We took that live. I remember that.
Right, but that was at the very end, and humongous chunks of the budget had been accomplished at that point. And what Cuomo says is, we're not going to do this piecemeal, I'm going to give you the whole thing.
But they know that, but if they did their own budget, he would veto every single addition.
And they couldn't override.
And they couldn't override, and they would not get anything. Right now, they're going to get table scraps, but that's more than they would get if they go the extender route.
Starve. Well, here's another question, and I want you to answer it because I don't understand. The Long Island guys are now saying no property tax cap, period, in the whole session?
I think what they're saying is, and they're very sensitive about this, so we were sure to try to get it right, but they're saying that they don't think a property tax cap is going to happen. Now, they've passed the property tax cap. The reason they say it's not going to happen is because there's not enough mandate relief. It kind of doesn't make sense because they already passed it without mandate relief, right?
Yeah, it seems like a little CYA to me.
Yeah, so what I think is really going on is they're saying it's not going to happen because they're not willing to do what the Assembly wants in order to have the Assembly
Which
pass
is the
property
rent
tax.
control laws, right? Which is the rent control
And
laws.
the Assembly wants the rent control far more than the Republicans want the property tax cap because the Republicans, as you said, passed the property tax cap. So if they don't get it, then it's a political issue that they can go back to their districts and say, we passed it, the Assembly didn't. But for the Assembly Democrats, they know that the budget or the property tax would be their best leverage on getting a deal on rent control. And they're not going to get it.
Yeah, I think Ken's right. I think that sometimes an issue is better than the policy. And I think also there are, what I've heard is that there are some Long Island senators who have heard from their school districts about what a property tax would actually mean if put into place, and it makes them a little nervous about how that...
Without mandate relief.
Yeah. Without mandate relief. Right, without mandate
yeah.
relief. And that makes them a little nervous about putting it in right away.
Yeah, and the other thing is, and I mean, in terms of the two-way, not to answer my own question, I really have been curious about why, and I haven't managed to get anybody to answer the question yet. But I think also, but if they do exactly what he wants, then he gets to say that he scared them into doing it, doesn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And he's already looking past the budget and thinking about fights over ethics, potentially over the property tax cap. And
prison closures, right?
Yeah, well, prison closures is probably going to be, likely going to be...
Just a criteria for determining how they'll get closed, not a list of what's going to be in there.
Not the list of things,
right?
yeah, that's possible.
I just think it just strengthens him. I mean, he's going to come out very strong. He's already very strong. He's going to come out incredibly strong.
He's going to get practically everything he wants, whether they do it amicably or not. If they don't do it amicably and he forces it through, then he'll get everything. But I think he wants an amicable solution because unlike the budget, most of the issues, other than ethics reform, which he's vowed if they don't get it, he would have a Moreland Act commission. Right. But most of those other issues, they have equal hand on. They could just say no, and they could torpedo his agenda though.
Speaking of agendas, I want to just talk about two different things. The first one being, because I don't want to run out of time, we really could speak about the budget like all day because it's going to be issue over the weekend and we're going to be tracking it, et cetera. But let's talk about redistricting because those numbers came out. Your districts grew enormously. Upstate lost a lot of population, which we knew was going to happen.
Well, Western New York, Western and Central New York.
Right. It depends on where you draw the upstate line. Yes, I know. We did okay here. And the Hudson Valley did quite well. Yep. To that end, I mean, it started really ticking, the whole redistricting reform fight, and it doesn't seem like anything's going to change in terms of the way they draw the lines, right?
Yeah.
That's it. They say that downstate could actually lose seats. We were all expecting it to be,
Yeah, but I mean, if that's only if you drew the lines exactly without gerrymandering and just to the numbers.
And that's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen. No, I don't think it's going to happen. Is anybody on Long Island worried in terms of the senators?
I don't think they're that worried because I don't think they think that redistricting reform is going to happen, and I think that
thanks to them.
Exactly, thanks to them, and I think that those Long Island senators, those Republicans, are pretty confident they're going to have good districts.
Yeah. So, we did have Jack McEnany on the show, and he was talking to us about LAT4, which is the legislative arm that does redistricting, and it's moving right along. So the other thing I want to talk about was Steve Levy. I mean, really, he could be governor today, and we would be looking at a serious scandal problem right in the middle of the budget. Were people surprised on Long Island? I was a little surprised. This is the gubernatorial candidate from Suffolk County, switched from Dem to Republican, got wooed into the race by state GOP chairman Ed Cox, and failed to get on the ballot.
I think a lot of people were surprised, especially because it had something to do with campaign finance, and Levy sort of put himself out there as Mr. Squeaky Clean on a lot of things. But I think if you were really paying attention to a lot of the sort of local stories about a court case down there involving, and I don't want to totally get into that because that's its own can of worms, but there was a court case in which a friend of Levy's was, I guess, put on the stand, and I'm sorry, a person who knew that friend was talking about how that person was essentially soliciting bribes from a county official, an unnamed county official, he who shall not be named.
Right.
And so everyone assumed that was Steve Levy, and it was sort of a very, very open secret, and it just made you wonder, is the DA looking into that? So I think that for people who were looking at that case, this isn't a total surprise. But
what was amazing was they come out and here's a guy, he's getting rid of his $4 million campaign account. He's giving it over to the DA. We know there was some impropriety, but neither Steve Levy, who says he accepts responsibility, says for what, and neither did the DA.
Right.
That little factoid was missing from all the talk.
Just to clear this up for viewers, in case people haven't been following it as closely as we have, Steve Levy, this Suffolk County executive who did run for governor, who we're looking at right here, and of course some people remember him because he was on the show a couple of times, a really pugnacious guy. He was a prodigious fundraiser. Announced abruptly that he wasn't going to seek re-election as county executive. He was term limited. This would have been the last time that he could have done it. I mean, it's just, can he come back from this? I mean, we've seen, look, Elliot Spitzer's on CNN now, and he's talking about running for mayor of New York City. Maybe anyone could come back.
He could come back perhaps on CNN, but not with that voice, I don't think. But the other thing is it's a real black eye for Ed Cox, who was really the guy who pushed Levy into this, and it's a shame to see Ed Cox, connected to somebody scandalized who has to resign in disgrace.
Except it was weird to see Ed Cox run toward him and defend him and say, oh, I think he would have been a great governor. Really, with a scandal like this hanging over his head, as far as his future, there's no statewide. First of all, how's he going to raise money?
Right, good point.
They just got rid of his whole account, zero.
That's a good point. I forgot about that little point. I mean, yeah, Ed Cox, look, let's be real. Ed Cox has been under fire from the rank and file. He's not exactly the most popular guy in the world among many Republicans. He does have supporters, and he has insisted that he will not be stepping down. He has, however, not had the greatest track record in terms of winning things. He didn't do so well with the gubernatorial race. He ended up with Carl Palladino because of what happened with his pushing of Levy and the failure to get him onto the ballot. And this is not going to help his case.
And you're seeing a lot of sort of backbiting and criticism, especially from the Lazio camp.
Yeah, well, right. There's a lot of sort of happiness, a little bit, coming from the Lazio camp.
And a lot of people felt that Steve Levy would have been the guy to take on Andrew Cuomo in 4 years for the Republicans.
Well, now, Elliot Spitzer said that he thought that Steve Levy could have beaten Andrew Cuomo.
But I'm saying in 4 years they were still talking about him, that Levy, because he would have been a full-blown Republican by then, registration and all.
Yeah, good point.
So, but now,
we're going to see actually the re-election announcement of another guy who might be problematic down the road, and that's Chris Collins, the Erie County executive, and we'll talk about that at a later date. I do want to just mention briefly, running possibly is for that seat that Levy is now not going to run for, John Flanagan.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, and that could be a whole other can of worms, because that would open up a state senate seat that the Democrats would fight for, and there is a viable candidate who's a Democrat down there, and if they were to lose that would set up a really interesting scenario about what the independent Democrats do. Do they go running back to John Sampson, or do they stick with Dean? And I don't know. I mean,
the third alternative.
Yeah.
They go running back to the Democrats with the assurance that John Sampson is no longer the leader.
But do you think that they could do that? You think they would be taken back into the fold by the Democrats, those four renegades, really?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they would. They would come back, certainly, for some emoluments, I believe would be the political term.
Okay, wait a minute. Jeff Klein has said some pretty strong things about John Sampson.
Okay.
And they've been, I'm sorry, they've been voting, but hold on, they've also been voting with the Republicans.
About John Sampson?
They've been voting with the Republicans.
But these guys have been Democrats their whole lives until now.
I can't imagine like Diane Savino, who is just about as pro-labor as a Democrat gets, would be able to essentially throw the entire Senate into the arms of the Republicans and be able to survive.
And if you were running, these guys are going to be running next year. Are you going to run? Are you going to be running as the guy who kept the majority away from the Democrats?
Last word for you, Kenny. We will see. I want to thank you very much, Ken Lovett. Thank you very much, Casey Seiler, and thank you, Michael Lehman. Thanks, everybody. And we'll be working all weekend, so it'll be fun.